Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We're champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Lu Ngo, coming to your ears from Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Let's learn together. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Doing Well. And on this week's episode, we are going to talk about finding equilibrium, balancing personal and professional life. And today, joining us in our virtual studio is Tan Sing Wuing. Wing is a clinical psychologist, and she is a highly qualified and experienced mental health professional with a strong dedication to helping individuals overcome their challenges to achieve overall well-being. With nearly 10 years of clinical practice, Wing has worked in diverse settings, including polyclinics, hospitals, and private practice, catering to a wide range of populations such as teenagers, working class adults, couples, expats, startup owners, and others. Lots of things that we're going to learn from Wing today, and I'm excited to talk about today's topic because I'm struggling with that big time. Not sure about you, audience. So we're going to have fun discovering that. But before we do, let's get to know you a bit better, Wing. Thank you for joining us. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I know we've got your bio here, and I really love what I see. But I'm sure our audience would love to know more about your professional journey because, it'll be nice to hear from you directly how you got here in your career and why you chose this line of work.
Yeah. Thanks, Lu, for inviting me to join the podcast today. It is always a calling for me to engage myself in the psychological world, to know more about humans and to help humans to arrive at the good life that they would want to live for themselves. And because of this dedication that is within myself that I want to help people, it eventually brings me into my degree studies in psychology. And after the few years of my undergrad study, I decided to just take the further specialized part into Master of Clinical Psychology. And that is where I'm graduated in back to 2016. And started my career as a clinical psychologist in different settings that you share and mentioned just now. Yeah. So now I'm in the private practice sector instead of in the public sector as I work in the past. And generally, just like Lu, you mentioned just now, I work with diverse group of people and generally more focusing at therapy work right now.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing. I think you're going to have a lot of insights to share with us today, especially because I know that one of the groups that you work with, in your practice is working class adults. And so obviously we're talking about, personal life and professional lives balance. It's going to be a really great opportunity to discuss that. Before we get into that part of the conversation, let's get to know you a bit better. We have this part we call Have You Met Wing? We're going to get to know you through some of your favorite things. I'm just loving this part because I get so many good recommendations from my guests. My first question to you is, what is your favorite book of all time?
I think this is going to be a boring answer because it is still going to be relevant to the area that I'm investing myself a lot, which is psychology. So I wish to share with our audience and Lu today, one of my favorite book is The Family Crucible, that written by Dr. Augustus Napier and Carl Whitaker. So basically, this is a book that is a great case study book talking about a family that is seeking family therapy from the authors. So the authors, Napier and Whitaker, both of them are the therapists for this family. So it is a book that kind of depicts and illustrates how the family therapy journey looked like for the family. while the issue actually started with the teenage daughter that has mood disorders and also suicidality, and how this identified client at the first place brings up the whole different dynamic and issue that lies much more complicated within the family system. So this is a very interesting book to read about if any of you that probably facing, family, marriage issues or probably parent-child issues. So this is a really good book to read.
No, interesting. I've never heard of that before, but certainly sounds intriguing. And yeah, I'm sure if anyone relates to those topics, they can pick them up. Now, what is a movie you have enjoyed recently?
Recently, I went into cinema to watch this show called Creation of God Part 1, The Kingdom of Storm. So this is a movie that talks about the Eastern fantasy epic, which happened about like 3,000 years ago. And this is a very interesting, again, an interesting movie that talks about the quite well-known myth that had been quite popular in the Chinese and how the ancient traditions that some of the Chinese will see the world and how they manage politics, relationship between human, the family hierarchy. And from this movie, I learned a lot more about some of the Chinese things that I will never know and never learn from my textbook. So this is a very interesting movie that I find recently. And we are going to have the part 2 and 3 probably next year or the years onwards. So I look forward for it.
Okay. I've also not heard of that. So that is very interesting. Okay. Thank you for sharing. Now, I wonder if you actually listen to any podcast. And if you do, what is your favorite one?
I like the podcast shared from Brené Brown. Yeah, one of the mental health professionals that also work very closely with vulnerability, shame, and guilt. But I don't really have I'm not really a big fan of podcasts all the time because of the different factors. But sometimes when I read book, and for me myself, because my first language is Mandarin, so usually I will read Mandarin books. I will probably share some of my thoughts and summary after I read a book in one of the Mandarin podcasts called Himalaya. Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, you mentioned Brene Brown. That is something that I can relate to, but I think her podcast got on hold. So I'm not sure. I think something happened between her and Spotify. I'm not sure what happened, but it hasn't been released for the past 10, 11 months. So I'm a little sad about that, to be honest, because I really love Brene's podcast, Unlocking Us. But yeah, good to know that you shared quite a few things there, not just one recommendation. So thank you for that. And next question is about your role model. I'm wondering if you have a role model, and if you do, who is that?
I actually have different role models as.
Okay.
But I wish to share one of the role model that is really meaningful and impactful to me, which is my clinical or therapy supervisor called Dr. Wu Jiujun. So she's a family therapist that based in Taiwan. I think now she's already 80 years old. So she's a very dedicated and experienced family therapist that really knows very well the work, how to get touch with people at different layers that can bring out the very within elements of a person at the stage of therapy and facilitate in the healing process. She's definitely one of my role model that I would like to see myself grow into and be a good therapist as her.
Cool. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. That's really great to hear. Finally, what is a course you've completed, you've taken, that really inspired you?
Recently, I have completed a course called Narrative Therapy course. So it is a therapy course that I am learning. But what I think it is interesting and inspiring for me is that one of the idea that I learned from narrative therapy is people are basically the story that we tell ourselves. So how we remember ourselves is truly important to define what kind of life that we are living. If we don't really like the version of how we experience life, we always have the avenue to tell ourselves a different story with different perspectives that you could invite in your life. And with that, I find another thing also very interesting is that people doesn't really have the stabilized sense of self for all the time. But we actually so-called like evolve or revolve our recognition about where we are in our life from time to time. So having to arrive at a stable sense of self is like a myth, and it's not something that narrative therapy works on. But promoting the continuous knowing of us at different stages and phases in our life is an interesting journey to look forward. And hopefully, with that openness, we can find life is always hopeful and we can live it like creatively.
Yeah, I love that. And it's very on brand with you as well, this course. Definitely, I think all of the answers that you've given us so far, they're kind of like sort of related to psychology or therapy. So yeah, super on brand with what you do professionally. And, that's pretty impressive because, you're very consistent in what you like and what you love. So
Yeah, like it is boring, sorry. At
it's
some
not
point.
boring. It's fun. I think that is the fun of, being able to really immerse in what you do professionally, right? Because that's the best thing. Like you're just enjoying what you're doing, and that's amazing. I really love that. And today, because we are talking about this equilibrium between personal life and professional life, and with you being so immersed in your work, I think you're going to be the perfect person to not only share the, psychological insights to us, but also practical tips. Because I'm sure, for you to love your work so much, you got to have a certain boundary in place. So, we'll talk about that now. Let's talk about today's topic, and let's start with well-being because that's why we're here. Thankfully, this show is about well-being, so we're not just talking about work and personal life and professional life in the context of whatever people normally define it. For example, work-life balance or so on. There are so many terminologies floating around nowadays, but because we're talking about well-being, let's set the scene. Let's start with well-being. What does well-being mean to you, Wing?
Yeah. Generally, well-being means the overall sense of perception of balance in life, or in general, I would say, is your subjective perception of a good life can look like. It can include of different parts of your life, but I think two elements pop up more importantly to me when I think about well-being, which is the meaning and satisfaction in life. Yeah, so I think a good life is a life that comes with meaning and you feel satisfied in life as well.
Yeah, I really, I couldn't agree more. I really just think about this whole concept of meaning and things like that because we are recording this towards the end of the year. Like, it might come out maybe mid next year. I don't know when, but just for context for our audience, like we're recording this and this is like towards the end of the year. And I think it's just such a great time to think about it, like what is the meaning of this year, and then overarchingly, what is the meaning of our lives? Where has our well-being been? Like, where is it going? How is it going? And it's just really interrelated, because I feel like a sense of meaning is so important in defining where we're going ourselves. When it comes to well-being, I think there's this really big like ideal of, like it has to be this great picture of your life where like you're doing well physically, mentally, emotionally, and you have everything, or it kind of like it looks like a movie sort of thing. But I don't necessarily think that it has to be that way. Like it's just it means so much more when you can attach meaning to it no matter what happens. And what I mean by that is when I look back on the year, I mean, it's only November, but when I look back on the year, it's kind of getting there. I do realize that a lot of the conversations that I've had this year on this show about well-being, it's kind of like it covers different aspects of well-being, but the key thing that really stood out was the fact that it doesn't matter what's going on with your well-being. It could be a little down, it could be meh, it could be anything, but you got to know why you're doing what you're doing, and like, how are you dealing with whatever it is that you're going through to maybe get through it, improve it. And I think a big factor of that is exactly what you're saying, meaning, because I do think that we choose our struggle. And I'm sure you probably will relate with this, especially being in a field like psychology. I know it can be very, very challenging. I have friends who are in psychology and they just talk about like how hard it is. I read a lot of psychology books, and I hear people who are therapists, counselors, psychologists talk about their career. And it's just like, it's a tough gig. It's not easy. So I'm sure you chose this struggle, right? So there's a reason you do the job that you're doing, and it's not easy, but you find meaning in it, which is why you're here. And so I think when it comes to that, a lot of people are attaching different kinds of meaning to their well-being, not necessarily like the meaning in their own lives. And I feel like that might derail them from actually working on their overall well-being, because they might be focusing on the wrong things in life, not necessarily looking at the meaning. Like, why did I choose this struggle? And I ask myself that question sometimes. I'm like, okay, I'm having a tough day, but why did I have a tough day? I chose this. And then why did I choose this? What is the meaning of all this? It can be a very existential question, but it helps to put things into perspective. So yeah, I do think that one of the biggest misconceptions that I think people have about well-being is you just, you gotta have great well-being all the time. And, like it looks great and it feels great, and, everything has to go well. Not really. Like, I feel like it's how you define your struggle. Like, and in your struggle, if you can find meaning there, that's actually where your well-being is in balance. So how about you? What do you think about misconceptions people have when it comes to well-being? Because you work with so many different age groups. I'm sure you notice a thing or two about well-being that people tend to get wrong about.
Yeah. Thanks, Lu Ngo, for your reflective sharing just now. Because before I come back to the question just now,
Yeah.
I just wish to share that I think life is full of problems, but which is the better problem that we choose? Probably just like what you shared just now, what kind of struggle that you pick for yourself. And before I came to my definition of well-being, as a student, we will Google so-called like the best answer from World Mental Health Organization usually is our indicator. So when I just Google what well-being means from a WHO point of view, it is just a very simple line: a positive state experienced by individuals and the societies. So it just gives a lot of space of imagination, probably even your sense of attachment of how you want to look at it, just like what you shared just now. Like, well-being is a very personal or subjective things that we all will need to like think and define for ourselves when we can have a reference. And there comes to the part of misconceptions, because when we have a reference, sometimes we can hold on too harsh to it, that it becomes something that lead us to a very different track from what probably is good or right for us. One of the general misconceptions that I always hear from my clients is that well-being is all about physical health. I don't know whether it is an Asian thing or it is just a global thing, but a lot of people will easily think about physical health when they talk about well-being instead of like mental health. But mental health gets a little bit more attention over probably the past few years, especially along the pandemic situations. But previously, I think a lot of people think more about their physical health than mental health when it comes to well-being. The definition to it is very narrow in a way. And because I am working in Singapore, so this is a first world country where a lot of people might think that they shouldn't complain because you are already living in a country that is resourceful. Some people may think that they have no rights, or even it is shameful to talk about things that maybe doesn't really go very well in contributing to that kind of well-being that one pursue. So this part of the misconception sometimes will stop people from really knowing where you are in terms of your own well-being level. And one more interesting thing that sometimes I explore and I hear from people is that they have this rigid idea of how well-being should be achieved. For example, you should exercise X times per week. You should eat this kind of like diet so that you will make sure that you will have a good body, and different kind of like things that probably will get into the person's minds how well-being should be attained, instead of like looking into what is really suitable for you, because reference is never going to be a determinant. We will need to like take reference, still a reference, but think about it wisely, what is really compatible with your needs in terms of like achieving a well-being state that you will desire for yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it might actually be an Asian thing, because I remember before I moved to Australia, I had no concept of mental health. Genuinely. Like I think about it now and I'm like, I didn't really know much about mental health until I moved here, actually. Because here people talk about it more often, more openly, and there's less, taboo when it comes to mental health. Because I feel like in Asian countries, maybe this might be like an overall like overgeneralization. I'm not sure, but at least where I'm from in Vietnam, it's really not a big thing, and my family struggles to talk about it. And I've mentioned that a few times on this show, actually. Like it's like every time something about mental health comes up, it's like it's a disease, like it's a bad thing, and you don't talk about it. And yeah, the emphasis is on physical health. And if someone is struggling with something, they would just say, oh, it's hard. It must be hard for that person. And that's it. And that there's not really, any emphasis on unpacking the issues, or, trying to be empathetic or understand what exactly they're going through. So I think there's a big trend now where people learn more about such issues and they talk about them, especially the younger generation, like Gen Z, I think are really great at that. But educating the previous generations, especially our, parents, grandparents, it's kind of like a whole different challenge in itself. So yeah, maybe some of our audience will relate with this because of their cultural background, and some might just go, "What are you guys talking about?" But I think it is something that we definitely need to talk more about, because I do know that where I was originally from, I live here now, but I still remember vividly what happened when I was there, and whenever I visit, I get a reminder that people in Vietnam, they don't talk about mental health problems in an open and respectful way as much as you would want them to be. And I think it's a learning curve. It's getting there, but it needs some work. So I'm sure maybe in other Asian countries it's probably a similar thing that we need to navigate through. Now, we're here to also talk about work-life balance, and that is another thing, because when it comes to work stress, I don't know about you, but my observation is I feel like most Asian people are just really good at like suppressing it. They don't necessarily talk about it or acknowledge that there's a problem. Like I think here in Australia, I find that people are more open in talking about it and sort of try to address the issue and things like that. But I know that, for example, my parents, when they talk about work, it's like, yeah, well, yeah, you know what, whatever. It's fine. It's really not fine, but they just kind of, try to not talk about it. And there's not really a sense of like work-life balance with a focus on well-being, on mental health, in my opinion. So this is just my personal observation. Could be way off, but I would love to hear from you, on that, and also on what you think work-life balance is. And also, I think nowadays people start to move towards talking about work-life integration rather than work-life balance. So, like what is this big thing that people tend to talk about when it comes to equilibrium between our personal life and our professional life?
I think initially when I look at this question, I actually feel it is a difficult question for me because I really don't know whether there is a possibility for us to arrive at work-life balance if we are looking at the balance that is like a flat line, like really a stable balance like that. I don't think it will ever happen. So sorry. But if we think about like work-life balance in a way that it is going like up, down, but we have our moments of up and down, and we embrace those moments, we are clear about where we are at different phases of our work and life level. I think that kind of work-life balance is what that another term that you mentioned just now, the work-life integration is referring to, because we can't run away from talking about work in our lives. Like humans really needs work no matter whether we like it or not, but we need to see ourselves deliver values, whether monetary, emotionally, or in other different kind of ways. We need to see how we are being useful at certain level to the society that we are living. But it is interesting also to think about the terminology of work-life balance as well, because it feels like if I can use a pie chart to represent this term, it appears like a 50-50%. This 50 is work and then another 50 is life. And then it's like, okay, but work is clear to me what it is about, but I don't know actually what is in life. Like, is it your health, your family, your friends, your personal growth, everything you have to chunk into the life here? I think it will be too heavy for this another 50% to like being occupied by so many different other areas in our life that it can appear as important as how work can mean to us.
Yeah.
So work-life integration will sound like a better way of how I want to approach it, rather than think about like really a work-life balance.
Yeah, definitely. I don't think it's 50-50 at all, because if we're saying that, half of life is work, then that is a very big assumption to make. And, and when you kind of talked about the weight of the scale of, one is, on the one side you have work, and then on the other side you have life, and, each is 50-50. It's kind of like, so our life is squished into 50% of our time. Like, that's it. And we live half the time, they work half the time. Like, it doesn't sound right, because work is a part of life. It is a big part of life for sure, but it's not everything. It's not so big that it's like its own thing and you just compartmentalize it. Because everything that you do, especially for you, like, you're so passionate about psychology, right? I'm sure outside of work, you're probably reading up on psychology.
I think I'm a fortunate one because my work is very relevant to life. Basically, like, it is interrelated. So work is work, but not necessarily too far from my life as well. However, there are a lot of probably other kinds of jobs that is outside that. Their job may be not really directly or indirectly relevant to their life. So maybe for that group of people, work-life balance is going to be a big thing, or work-life integration is going to be a big topic for them to really think through. Yeah. And this topic also makes me think about like the ecosystem that we are living in. Because as much as we want to arrive at the integration stage between work and life, but a lot of time there are also a lot of like external factors that is going to affect how we feel or how we look at the matter. if we are living in the ecosystem that emphasize work more than your personal life, it will be a bit challenging or probably difficult for that group to arrive at work-life integration that will look healthy for them.
Yeah, definitely. I remember you mentioning that part of well-being and how you see it is, that sense of meaning and purpose in life, right? And
Oh,
now we're also talking about work-life integration, not balance, integration. And obviously there's, this sense of where is that sitting in? How does that fit into our well-being, right? Because if we really think about integrating our work into our life and finding a sense of meaning and purpose, I think that is definitely something that we all strive for, even if it's really, really hard. And I'm sure, by this point, our audience is can kind of guess where I'm going with this. Integrating work into life and doing what you find meaningful and, finding meaning out of what you're doing would definitely help to enhance your well-being, especially if I'm taking straight from your definition there. But how else does it affect our well-being? Because obviously it's not just well-being is not just one thing. It's so many different things there. And so let's say we find that balance in our work-life integration. How does that look for our well-being?
I think in general, I would say that if we can arrive at a work-life integration or balance that we look into, which means that in the best case scenario, we find a sense of meaning and purpose in the work that we do, it would definitely help us to feel more satisfied in general in terms of the quality of life that we are living, or even to utilize what we think we learned from our work into the other areas in our life. For example, we will need to learn communication skills, not just at workplace, but also apply with the people that we love. So if we can see some of the similarities between the different areas, for example, like work, family life, what are the common things that both these areas will require? For example, the example that I share, communication, then it is not so much about like whether you need to have to like just focus at work, but actually what you learn or what you attach the meaning of learning a better effective communication skills at work, it will be able to apply to other areas. So generally, if we feel more purposeful and meaningful in terms of how this work contributing to my well-being, it is going to benefit any other different areas in my life as well. Psychologically, in the positive psych area, we call it a broaden and build theory. So you learn from one area, yes, but if you know how to translate and further apply it in across different areas, your work is going to help you to be a better person in other areas in your life as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I really love that. I remember there was a podcast I did earlier this year, and I have not been able to get it out of my head. Like, I don't remember what the topic was about anymore, but it's related to the point that you're making, because I remember telling the guest that, like, I can show up in my work, but I cannot show up in my life. Like, because I'm a little bit burnt out. So I can show up in my work, all right, but, like, I can't not really do anything meaningful. Like, I don't feel like I'm showing up the way that I should be showing up in my life. And then she said, that is interesting, Lu, because how you show up in work is how you show up in life. So there shouldn't be a difference there. And then I paused for a second and I was like, does that mean that I'm thinking that I'm showing up at work, but I'm not? Or what is it? Like, that is an interesting observation. Like, I mean, I don't agree completely with what the guest was saying, because, from my own personal observation, it's kind of like, I'm showing up at work differently from when I'm showing up in life. Still, like, it's just there's a difference there. But maybe she's onto something. Like, maybe I need to evaluate and see where else I'm putting my energy into, and, like, where I can draw a bit more energy from, and show up in life the way that I show up at work. And if you're saying what you just said, related to this point, how like it can add to each other, right? Like how you're working might make you live better, and vice versa. I started to think, and I'm like, okay, that is very interesting, because your point and the previous guest's point. Now, I apologize. I actually don't remember the guest's name at this moment. Like I'm blanking. It'll come back to me. But that is interesting, because your point and her point are very similar.
But I hope to help Lu for this part, right? Give you an example. Like for kids, right? When we learn things, we learned about the name of the vegetables. For example, I can name cabbage, brinjals, celery, or different kind of things. But I actually cannot group it as vegetables when I'm 3 years old. I only can group it into vegetables when I attain a higher order reasoning, that I find a bigger umbrella to group them together. Then when I tell you vegetables, you have that different things.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like you probably appear as a very like friendly persons or like communicable persons at your work. It doesn't guarantee you to be the similar version, in other areas of your life. I agree with that, but that doesn't mean that you don't have the chance to grow yourself into someone that is more congruent across different parts of your life. Because if we think about work-life balance, we hope to be a congruent person as well. We don't want to be like extreme in one area, but not in another area. But whatever that happens in life, those experiences usually will have a similar higher order that is yet to be explored. But whether or not we think that it is necessary for us to think about it, we really spend time to reflect and regroup again how we approach life. I think that will help a person to grow at different phases into a more integrated person, and hopefully a more congruent person that one day you will say, I appear in my work, but I appear in my life as well. Like it's the same ingredient, but I make it into different cakes. Like I have eggs, flour, machines, and different things. I can make like taro cake, or I can make mango cake. At work, I'm a mango cake, but in life, I'm a taro. But actually, the raw materials are the same, because we work with people, no matter at work or like in your personal life. You cannot run away from working with humans. You definitely acquire soft skills, how to like deal with people. The difference is more technical. For example, I'm a psychologist, so professionally, I'm more equipped with psychological knowledge that maybe Lu doesn't have it, but Lu is more technical and a better person to tell me more about podcast. So we have our professional skills, which is going to be different, but as much as we have different, we have similarity as well. We talk, we develop styles of how we communicate with people, how we express things, and that doesn't actually different too much if you think about it across different areas of our life.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it is a good point that you said there, because I think it's a learning curve. A lot of the time, I think it's not just it's not about time per se, but it's also energy, right? Because when we're talking about an imbalance between work and life, it doesn't mean that like you spend more than half of your time working necessarily. It doesn't mean that. It might just mean that you spend like 40 hours a week working, and by the end of it, you're just so drained that you just don't do anything meaningful in life. And that is an energy thing rather than a time thing. And I think we can all learn to do that. And I had to learn to do that and to change so much when I found out I was so burnt out. And I was like, you know what? Like I need to get out there. I need to stop being on my couch watching TV to decompress. I need to go for walks. I need to socialize. I need to go to experiences and nurture that sense of wonder in my life again, and to feel connected with life. because it's so easy and comfortable to just switch off from work by walking from your desk to your couch and just sit there and enjoy whatever it is that is on TV. And I think it's a hard thing for me to achieve. Like when I think about the year that is almost gone, I'm like, if there's one thing that I'm better at, it is not staying on my couch after work. And I think that's just energy management, really. Like, even if I feel like I don't want to do anything, I would force myself to go do something, even just go for a walk. It helps so much, put on an audiobook and go out. But that is sort of like me trying to manage that. And it's still not like, I don't think it is a great strategy still, because I feel like there's so much more that I want to do. And, I'm still slowly getting there. But for the benefits of our audience, I know what it is like, but I think you're probably the better person to explain how it feels when there's this sense of imbalance between our work and life. I think this is going to be very beneficial for our audience to understand, because then they can tell when there's, too much stress, or when they need to be a bit more caring towards their own well-being because of this imbalance.
If one started to feel imbalanced, usually it will be best that you're aware, but I think most of the cases they were not aware. So you might have to check in with yourself. I think generally from these two main perspectives, the first is definitely physical, whether you experience a sense of fatigue regardless of how much hours you actually sleep, or maybe you have insomnia, but you couldn't tell why you are having insomnia. You might have body ache across the different parts of your body, or some people maybe will face unexpected fever that you can't really tell the reason, because your body may be inflamed within, that is telling you that you are too burned out. Mm-hmm. So physical symptoms is definitely one of the indicator that we can help ourselves to just check whether work life had been imbalanced for you. Mm-hmm. Then the second part, I think, is more about the psychological part, whether you feel probably more demotivated to go out. For example, like what Lu you shared with us just now, if you feel so tired to go out, you are demotivated in doing the things that used to give you a lot of joy, then those are some of the things that you might want to just look into further. How you feel also generally during your off day, maybe not your work day, but your off day, are you still probably thinking about your work a lot? Is there any other areas that will make life interesting for you? If you probably can't answer yourself, then that is another alarming sign as well. Some people, maybe they will even have procrastination at work. They used to be very productive, but they started to see their productivity reduce sharply over a short period of time, that it can range from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. So these are some of the psychological symptoms that some of our audience can take it as a reference as well, to just check in with yourself whether imbalance could already find you in person, or you might just want to just take a moment and pause for a while, check in with yourself. It is always good to have a screening with you regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great point. And I think if our audience can start to pay attention to the signs that you just said, they will be able to at least identify when there's an imbalance between their professional and personal life. And awareness is the key to actually resolving any issues, right? So that's the first step. Now, I think we will go into, lots of practical aspects of this a little bit later. But there's another thing that has come out in the past couple of years, and I'm sure everyone knows about the work from home trend. And I'm one of those people that I think I would say is fortunate enough to be able to work from home, most of the time. But I also find that it's probably challenging to sort of draw the line between your professional and your personal lives. for obvious reasons. Your office is your home and your home is your office, sort of thing. So for a lot of our audience who are tuning into this podcast, that might be the case. Some of them might actually work for, at their office 5 days a week, or they work on site all the time. But I'm sure a pretty big population now works from home, and that is a real challenge for them. So how can people actually maintain this balance, especially for those that are working from home?
I think one keyword will be a great tips for everyone, which is boundary. So the boundary here refers to a few things. The first one is in terms of time. You might want to really make sure that you adhere to your working hour and get it clear from your personal hour. So you need to have the boundary in terms of time. Number two, I think, is to have the boundary in terms of space. I know in some case, maybe that is not really something that they can do, is a luxury. But in whatever case that we can try to have the boundary in terms of the space, it will be helpful that you have your specific work zone that is separated from your personal space. So that will be another boundary that is important to consider in terms of the space. And then another thing I think is just generally as well, you need to have enough rest for yourself. Make sure that you have 8 hours of sleep per day, generally for everyone, including for adult as well. You need to rest well in order for you to not fall asleep during your working hour because you are home. Some people, and I would say actually a lot that I met, that they would tend to just lose out this part of their sleep because they don't really sleep well. And working from home just give them the convenience that you can just nap in between, which is not really very healthy. So just get yourself a healthy diet, healthy range of sleep. Just take care of yourself in terms of your personal care area. That will be helpful as well for you to find working from home becoming a better option, or probably a situation for oneself.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. Thank you. And we have to be even more practical now, because now you're kind of getting us onto the tips train, and our audience might wonder, yeah, but I need a little more. It's not just about working from home. I find it hard to balance my personal and professional life. So let's get into our practice part. And I would love to get you to share a practice with our audience that is applicable to anyone and everyone, anyone who is working and really would like to maintain their balance, or at least find a balance between their personal life and their professional life, so that they can still have a sense of well-being in their lives. What would be something that you do yourself, or if you don't do any particular practice yourself, but you would recommend something to, let's say, a client or a patient that you work with, what would you recommend?
Usually, I think one of the biggest challenge, and I still think that it is also one of the most important area that we need to manage for work-life balance, no matter working from home or office, is our mobile use. My recommendation, and as for myself, I'll usually log out from my social media account when I'm working. Mm-hmm. I will only come back to it really at my personal time. And I will separate also my work WhatsApp from my personal WhatsApp as well. I don't mix them together. Same applicable for your email address as well. It will be good that if you can really have a clearer separation between the apps that you use for your work and then the apps that you use for your personal life. I think that is one of the things that I think is quite helpful. And I think the second thing that is quite helpful for our work-life balance is to also keep open communications or discussions with our loved one about our sense of well-being in our life, which is also included a part of your work. I know that some people might say that it is not the best idea that you always talk about your work with your loved one, because it is going to be burdening on them. But I think it is different when we want to share with our loved one about how we are doing in our work versus you want to just rant negatively without consider how your audience or how your loved one feel. There's a fine line that we will just need to find. But maintain a healthy interpersonal relationship is going to be important in terms of contributing to our well-being at work. So I think that will be something that is also quite practical for us to think about in a more interpersonal area.
Yeah, really good. I think that's a really practical tip that anyone can try. And I think, talking to loved ones openly about work is something that I struggle with personally, because I feel like I just don't want to talk about work, because I feel like when it comes to having conversations with loved ones, I just want it to be lighthearted and more life focused than work focused. So I try to not talk about it, but then sometimes I feel like that is also not helpful for the relationship or for well-being in general, because they should know what's going on. Because sometimes my mood is sour because it's a tough day at work, for example, and I don't tell them, and then they just don't know what's going on with my behavior. And so I think when you mentioned that practice, I'm kind of like, you know what, that would actually be very helpful in nurturing relationships and improving my overall well-being. And it's good to share. It's just hard sometimes to open up, but it's good to share, definitely.
Yeah. Sharing doesn't mean that we are discussing about solutions. Because what I find it very, probably I would say a problematic is when we share about our work and then rather than sharing, actually it slowly move into a direction of discussing what is the best for you to do, in the scenarios, or probably your partner is so eagerly want to solve the problem for you instead of really just be a good listener. Because with our loved one, we don't really need a solution bank, of a living solution bank, but
Yeah.
we need their presence. As much as we want ourselves to be the support system for our loved one whenever if they have difficulties or probably challenging day at their work. So having that maintenance in terms of the interpersonal relationship is also a big part of well-being and work well-being as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great tip. And thank you for sharing that. I think it's just something that I didn't know I needed to hear today. But yeah, that's extremely helpful, especially when it's so hard nowadays to find the balance in the first place. Like, what is it really? How do you even balance personal life and professional life? It's kind of intertwined, and the work life integration part as well is something that, even though people talk about in such a positive light, I feel like sometimes it can be a bit intrusive, where it's kind of like, oh, I don't really want to integrate my personal life and professional life. I just want me to be two different people, but actually it doesn't work. I'm one person. So I need to navigate through all of that and manage my energy in a way that would, help with my well-being. And I think, if our audience is tuning into this episode, they're probably struggling with that too. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of the tips today. Now, we're at the end of the podcast. And before we let you go, obviously, I would love to get you to have your open mic and share about anything else that you might be passionate about. I'm sure there's so much more that we can learn from you. So the floor is all yours, Wing. Go for it.
Yeah. I don't actually actively doing a lot of public engagement. So probably for anyone that is interested to just keep touch with me or probably exchange ideas with me, you can always go to my Facebook. My name is Psychologist Wings. My Facebook
Oh,
name. Yeah. So you can just Google it and then you can get touch with me there. Or if you are able to speak and understand Mandarin, I'll definitely welcome you to listen to my Mandarin podcast because I share books that is related to well-being over there that hopefully maybe some of the chapters will be helpful for you if you need some of the tips that is specifically shared in the podcast platform called Simalaya. Yeah. And finally, I want to introduce myself as well. I am currently also having my private practice in one of the private psychology center called Redwood Psychology in Singapore. So I usually work with my clients face-to-face in the therapy space at Redwood Psychology. So if anyone that think you have any close one that probably in Singapore that might want to look for psychological help, please feel free to also like Google us at Redwood Psychology, and I'm definitely happy to see and join the journey of growth in your.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for sharing that. And it was supposed to be my last question before we wrap up, but you already covered it. So we know where to find you on the interweb. We know how to collaborate with you. So yeah, perfect. Thank you. And thanks again for being here today. It's not a new topic, but certainly some new thoughts there that we've learned from you today. And I had a great time just talking about it. It helps me to process my own thoughts and how I'm going to, strike a balance between my personal life and professional life. Hopefully this helps our audience, and hopefully we'll have you back some other time.
Okay. Thanks, Lu, for your invitation, and the team as well.
You have been listening to Doing Well, the Wellbeing Science Insights podcast produced by the Wellbeing Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate, share, and subscribe to our channel so that other people can find it and we can continue to provide quality content. More of our work can be found on our website, we.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Lu Ngo. Thanks for tuning in.